Tom Foy, American Rehab LLC. Today we're headed out to the Ledyard, Connecticut area to look at a potential flip property out on a small lake out in Ledyard. For those of you who may be a little bit familiar with Connecticut but not from Connecticut, this is over in the area of our two casinos. Many of you may be familiar with at least that aspect. This particular property for me is about an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 30 minutes from where I normally live, work, and play. The reason for that is in the last couple of years, obviously waterfront properties throughout the country and certainly on the East Coast, Connecticut being no exception, have skyrocketed in price. I like to keep my projects at the lower end. This is a second job for me, if you will, and while I enjoy it, I do still have a full-time job besides this, and I have other responsibilities like most people do in life. So keeping all those in check for me has always been trying to keep a project within 15-20 minutes of where I live, where my other job takes place, and where most of my family and their related functions have happened. I'm going a little bit beyond the circle, if you will, here today. Money is a driving factor. This particular property sits at $150K, small house, small lake. But it looks like it's going to need a ton of work, which I'm not afraid of in any way, shape, or form. I've done this before. Be honest with you, there's probably not too much that really scares me in terms of real estate, with the exception of crumbling or destroyed foundations. That particular aspect is something that I'm cautioning myself against. But if you're skilled in that aspect too, even those properties don't scare everybody. But this particular property we're going to look at is a ranch-style home. Sits up on a little bit of a hill overlooking a road, which then sits over a lake. So there should be some lake views there. We hopefully will be able to take advantage of that view with the project when it's completed. That's what the potential next buyer is going to be looking for. It's worked for me in the past. I'm hoping it would work for me here again if this property meets my criteria. You don't know until you walk these things, though, and especially the way I work, I have to physically walk through the property before things seem to click as far as what's needed, what potential things I think I can do with it. Once I've walked a property, I'm pretty good at mapping out in my head what I think is the future for that property if I was the purchaser. And certainly as a licensed contractor in Connecticut, I have a little bit of advantage over some things in terms of I can do a little more than most. So I'm kind of a hands-on flipper, if you will, as well. But it's not all about the money. There's an interest in doing the work. It is fun. It is a little bit of an adventure in life, if you will. But once I've walked the property, I can then transpose the numbers that are necessary for the purchase and the renovations, contractors that I'll need to contract out for specific, licensed trades. And then, of course, I have to then consider the potential for the resale on the other end. I have the advantage over many in that aspect is that I'm also a realtor in Connecticut. So as a realtor for Keller Williams Realty in Longmeadow, Massachusetts, as a matter of fact, I have the ability to help myself purchase the home and help myself resell the home, even though the actual work is being done here by American Rehab LLC, which is an LLC that I'm the primary person and manager of. Once we've walked the property, we've laid the numbers, we've got it on paper, we've made our offer, we make our purchase. The trips to and from these projects can be rather extensive. That's why another reason, if you will, you want to keep that 15-20 minute circle of radius of work. On one of these projects, I might go 150, 200 trips between the bank, visiting with contractors, meeting with inspectors, out there for materials deliveries, appliance deliveries, back and forth to the landfills with demo projects, meeting with contractors with dumpsters and refrigerators and you name it. 150, 200 trips is a lot, and you have to take that into account in terms of the distance you travel each time you make that trip. However, because of the higher prices, we're going to push a little bit here on this one. I haven't even yet considered the full logistics on how I would accomplish it. I would either have to stay a little more time on site and or find a way to have others do a little more of the work. But let's walk the property today. Let's see if it's worth our further consideration. If it is, we'll get the numbers down. We'll get a a schematic that I typically put on paper, just a rough hand draw of what I think it should look like in the end, and we'll go from there. Okay, first things first, we'll walk up what would be the walkway or upper portion of a rather rough driveway here. As you'll see in a moment here when I spin the camera around, this property needs a ton of work, but the views have potential, and what you see could be a diamond in the rough. You won't know till you actually look it over, produce your numbers, and then come up with a game plan. So let's walk and talk. All right, like I said, the driveway, if you will, is rather rough in terms of the walk portion up to the house. There's not much of a backyard. In fact, it's a little bit of a hill, if you will, pretty much to the rear of the property, and it's downhill to the front of the property. The driveway looks like it might even be a common aspect shared with perhaps the neighbor, but I won't know until I pull the property card up and compare where the driveway I'm looking at sits. The property certainly has the need to be well groomed here. There's a lot of leaves and tree debris and rocks, and it certainly needs to be cleaned up in terms of branches. There appears to be no power to the house, though the power aspect is still here. It's just lying on the ground and disconnected. And we do overlook a small pond or lake in the Ledyard, Connecticut area, so there's some potential there. But if you look at the side of this house, it certainly has to be stripped down and sheathing reapplied to most of it. The chimney, though, I don't know if I would have a plan for it in my heating plans for this project, certainly appears to be fairly decent, though it could use a little repairs and inspections. The back of the property, as you can see, looks like it's got some, perhaps it's additions over the years. This little piece might have been added on to this portion here. A porch might have been added onto. I don't know how this little ranch originally started. But obviously we're talking a whole new electrical service here from the road all the way through the entire home. Small house, so we're probably going to be able to get away with 100 amp service. But that will be something that the electrical contractor that I typically use, or whoever I bring out here, would have to determine for me. Certainly the expense, though small, there's an expense here for the grounds itself. There's a lot of grooming that needs to be done to make this a little more presentable to the next buyer. And they certainly want to have some family space. And who knows what you're going to uncover when you start cleaning out under the rocks and behind the house and underneath the leaves. And there's a lot of landscaping that perhaps you can work with the items that are here, but certainly need to be addressed and cleaned up so that you have a more presentable property. This appears to be just a phone line, but anytime you're playing with a house of this age, you certainly don't want to touch anything that you don't know or for sure is not live. But let me give you the perspective of the view from what would be the front door, if you will. And again, it's limited views and it's overlooking a road, but it's elevated, so you would still have a little bit of something to look at in terms of property view. The house itself obviously is in need of a lot of work. I don't see keeping this siding, and it's probably going to need to be resheathed once opened up. The roof itself could be solid, may not be terrible, but that portion up front here on the porch has got to get replaced. And typically having a good solid roof and a new roof is an easier resale anyway. So that'll probably be a consideration for me regardless. If I look at the corner of the foundation here, obviously there's going to be some issues, perhaps major in nature. I typically don't take on properties that need lots of renovations to their foundations, but I would have to look to see before I decided to walk away or take on the property. Windows don't look to be too bad. However, the advantage of having a lakefront property is lakefront views, so those would probably have to be expanded and replaced anyway. You've got a multitude of sidings here, obviously. There's some sheathing showing that's weathered. It's certainly not watertight in terms of its design, so we don't know what kind of conditions we're going to find inside. We have some older wood siding. There's some wet or has been wet in the past. Pressed board is part of the sheathing and backing. It's probably the insulation aspect of it. And it looks like it's over possibly what would be asbestos-based siding from back in the day. So there's a lot of demo type work that needs to be done to this home. You're probably talking taking it down to its original framing, repairing what's necessary there, and then adding everything new from plumbing, electrical, insulation, sheetrock, all the way to doors and trim. There's some issues with the foundation there and the sill plates. Back side of the property, obviously not in much better condition. And again, there's not a lot of yard to claim here, but you're going to have to claim some yard so that the potential future buyers have a little family space. I don't know what we're going to find inside, but I certainly believe whatever it is going to require a lot of work. So let's go take a look. All right, let me show you what I would see when I walk into this lovely property. Obviously, we need all new sheathing, siding, roofing, gutters. That includes the actual plywood on the actual roof itself. You walk inside, it's kind of a shotgun concept from front to back, with the kitchen being on the lake side, which is good because you could look at the kitchen sink as an aspect of cleaning and viewing the property's biggest advantage, which is the lake. But it's small. There looks to be 3 small bedrooms, very low ceilings. Certainly can feel that the subfloor itself is compromised. So at the very least, we're talking, all new subfloor, all new floors. If not insulated, we would have to take the insulation into consideration for changing that aspect for the efficiency that would be needed for the next potential owner. It's never going to be a big place unless you expand in terms of the size, but it's a limited postage stamp lot. I don't think there's a ton of money to be made in the neighborhood. So in all honesty, I would try to keep it close to the footprint, but obviously improve the conditions so that they're livable, presentable, and multiple people would hopefully be interested in the final product. These bedrooms are not really all that adequate, but perhaps for a lake home, a cottage home, a second home, if you will, or a starter home, we could make this work. I certainly think that if we could open up to the rafters above, and go up to the collar ties at a higher point with our sheetrock, we'd have a little more of an open feeling, a little bigger feeling in here. And we need to open up this particular area with some more windows so that you're taking advantage of what is really the only huge selling feature here, the fact that you have a lake view. Obviously, none of these utility type items would be kept. None of the kitchen components would be kept. I don't see even possibly keeping the walls in sheetrock at this point, though there's that potential depending on how it turns out, the condition of these items really are. But there's a lot of work, and my biggest concern is not the work. My biggest concern is what's underneath this floor. What issues do we have with foundation? What issues do we have with water that would, even if we were to replace everything, what would be the terms of the length that would last before we wind up in a similar condition in the future with all our new products? So any water issues, any issues with the foundation underneath me would have to be obviously taken into consideration and fixed before you could sell this as a nice home to somebody else. And all of those are cost considerations. Okay, now that we've walked the property, I have a little bit of a perspective on it from what I think my interest would or wouldn't be. The first thing is you have to bear in mind that in most of these jurisdictions, you can't go below the 50 percentile mark in terms of demolition on a home without making complete changes to the entire home and meeting current code standards and current lot availability and a lot of other factors that aren't always available on a particular home that you're purchasing. This house is certainly going to be close to that number if you were to do it the way I would like to do it. But even if you try to keep with that concept, you're certainly at the very least on this particular home that we just viewed, looking at complete, new sheathing throughout the outside. That means then new siding, new roofing material, new gutters, certainly a new electrical system from the street all the way through to every outlet in the home. I would prefer to put the feed for the house, which isn't a big deal. It depends on what the contractor for the licensing aspects tells me. But I've done enough of these to know that I probably wouldn't have a problem putting it on what would be the far side, not the side we entered, which would be your side or front door, but on the back side where the bathroom is, so that while the utility control fuse boxes, the panel, if you will, would be back at that end of the home, it would alleviate the cable coming across the front yard, the side front yard, if you will. It'd be more of the back portion of the house, which is less likely to be utilized by people. It wouldn't be in view when you pulled up onto the driveway itself. There'd be a little more of an advantage to the view of the home if it were there, in my opinion. But either way, you work with the power feed where the power feed has to go. Obviously, we're talking probably all new plumbing inside if the plumbing proves to be inadequate. I don't know the condition of the well pump, but if the well's not dry, then certainly the pump is not a huge investment in terms of changes. And if the well feeds fine and the well works fine, well water in of itself is not a major issue. Whereby a body of water, typically you don't have to go too deep to get to fresh water if you have to re-drill, but it's a tight lot. There's a cost per foot, obviously, in drilling a new well, and we are elevated, so perhaps here you do have to go down some distance to get to the water source, if and only if you have to re-drill a well, and I've had to do that in the past and on a lakefront property as well. With regards to the inside, I think the biggest thing is the expansion of the view with windows, new sheetrock where necessary, elevate the roof to the point where you give a little more of a volume to the inside of the house, maybe a little better view of the lake from the front side, looking forward, or looking lakeside, if you will. But we don't want to go so much in terms of the framing volume here that we've reduced the house to a point where we have to take this thing down and start over and meet all current size standards, lot standards, things that we can't change here. We're certainly going to do all the mechanicals to code. We're going to do any changes we do to code. There's no advantage in selling someone a home that you didn't do to code because of the liability factor. So certainly if you do these right. And sometimes that means your profit margin gets dwindled quite a bit. Sometimes you can even lose money on a flip if you do what you need to do in all aspects just because it had to get done to make it a better product for somebody else, for your potential buyer. But your liability down the road is a lot less when you can say, hey, I did it by permit, I did it by code, everything was properly inspected, we used the best materials that we could get our hands on. And even if you have to testify later, hey, I took a loss to make this right, you're certainly going to have a lot better base, if you will, underneath your feet legally than if you cut corners or don't do what you need to do here. We work, obviously, as a licensed contractor. I work by code in the code book. I only use licensed contractors. I always involve the town where necessary for inspections, just because it reduces your liability. You did it the way they wanted it done. Therefore, if there are any problems down the road, you didn't foresee those problems. Perhaps nobody did because the code allowed for you to do what you did. Do I see potential here? Yes. Do I see a huge profit here? Maybe not so much. Do I see something that could be cleaned up and reduced to a little bit bigger than its current footprint, but not much, and still be of value to somebody else, I certainly do. If we could expand this in terms of size, then I think you'd have a better potential for more profit. But if that expansion alone could cost you so much in terms of what you have to keep up with to make everything current, that it may not be worth the extra investment. I still have to go home, run the numbers, put it on paper, see if I can draft some ideas in terms of bedrooms or lofts or whatever the possibilities are here. But the bottom line is, almost anything you look at, unless it's just a lot, in which case then your imagination is your limit, has potential. It's just a matter of what are you going to do with the postage stamp you have here that'll make it so somebody else, after you're done with it, wants to buy it, live in it, and be happy with it. So let me go home. I'll do that part of it. At some point, I'll show you the renditions on that, the numbers on that, the concept related to that. But the bottom line is, as a realtor, as an investor, as a flipper, even this property in its rough condition, elevated location with very limited backyard, a shared driveway, and not a ton of real nice homes around it, has potential to become somebody's really nice house. But whether that investment and that time and money into this property is something that'll produce me money and make me want to go do it tomorrow, that remains to be seen until I see my numbers. But you saw the property, you saw the setting, you saw the house the way it currently sits, obviously. Let me do what I normally do behind closed doors and expose that portion to you in terms of the numbers it would cost, the estimated materials, the contractors I would need, what permitting aspects we would have to deal with. And then we have to take into consideration some of the unknowns too. We don't know what the septic situation is here because nothing's been disclosed to us yet. We don't know the quality or condition of the wells here, though there appears to at least be a well already drawing water. But the long and short of it is here, it's not a total loss, though the property is a little rough in terms of its outward appearance and its inward appearance, as you well saw when I walked through it and videotaped it for you. Once again, Tom Foy, American Rehab LLC, not much scares me, and if that doesn't prove it, I guess not much will. But when it comes to real estate, almost everything with a good base has potential. It's just whether the costs will outweigh your planned benefits. We'll get back to you on it, and thanks for hanging out. Okay, let's discuss a second element, if you will, with regards to real estate. We already discussed location, which you'll hear over and over again about just about any real estate show you've ever seen, any book you ever read. And certainly the concept would have to make sense to you as a home buyer, a home investor, or in this case here, for me, a home flipper. If you can't sell it to someone else, you probably wouldn't buy it. And if you can't sell it as a flipper, you're not going to make any money. And potentially the higher paying homes, the better homes, it's based on the location that they're at. So we have a water visible property here, right? So that's a positive thing. We discussed that. However, on any real estate transaction that you get involved in, whether it's your own home, in all honesty, you do it for investment purposes, you do it because you want to be a renter, you do it because you want to flip homes, you even do it because you're a licensed contractor who wants to build new homes. We've taken into account the location aspect, but now when you're buying someone else's property like I'm doing here, or even I guess if you're buying a lot as the builder, the deal itself has to make sense. And there's an old saying that you make your money when you purchase. If you don't make the buy. So when you buy these fixer-uppers, when you buy these potential projects, you have to have made your money in some regard with the purchase portion of it, and not be solely relying on what you think the property can produce later, therefore perhaps overpaying up front in comparison to what would be a good deal or a better deal. And in some regards, despite what you think the property can give you later, if the purchase up front isn't right, isn't proper, isn't a good deal, doesn't wow you as an investor making money at what you're doing, you probably should walk away from the property. Now, I'm sure there's people out there that are going to scream and yell that they overpaid for something, but their potential plan for it made it worth the while for them or their investors in the long run. But that concept is pretty basic, and it really should be considered certainly by someone who doesn't have experience in flipping or hasn't purchased and renovated a lot of homes, hasn't purchased a home at all, or even in making a first home purchase. If it's not a good deal, it's not a good deal. And if you're looking to make money or have a sizable nest egg from your investment, even in your primary home, then you need to make sure that that deal, when you make your purchase, is one you can be proud of, happy with, and profit from, even if it's after you've resold it. So with regards to the property here in Ledyard, we have to now consider what they're asking, which is $150,000. We have to compare that to our renovation costs, which I think are going to be on the lower end, in all honesty, because I don't plan on doing a whole lot of expansion here. I'm not going to raise the roof and loft it out. I'm not going to add too many more windows than are already there, except for more sizable windows with a view of the lake. And the changes on the inside, other than the kitchen and bathroom items themselves, will be kind of minimal. I guess there's a floor cost too, because you're going to need new flooring throughout, but it's a small house. So realistically, I think here the purchase price is a little steep when you add even the minimal costs in, because of the location, and I haven't studied it thoroughly yet, and I will. I don't think there's a huge potential based on what I saw in the neighborhood, where you have mobile homes, garbage piled up along some of the houses themselves. I passed even chickens roaming the front yard of several houses on my way up there, and I didn't see a lot of stellar, beautiful lake homes as I drove in. So I don't plan on becoming one of those either. I don't plan on having chickens out front, and I don't expect to have a stellar, large lake home here. But I want a nice, clean product, and I want it to sell, and I want to make money at it. So I think the $150,000 asking price, which is not unusual considering the current standard of prices when it comes to waterfront property in the nation, if not certainly in Connecticut, is a little bit more than I would want to spend. So now we have to negotiate that down. We'll have to research who's holding the property right now, what their potential holding money, what they may owe on the property, if anything, what their mortgage is if they have one. If it's a real estate that's owned, in this case, I believe it's going to be by an estate. Obviously, you're going to be dealing with a probate court, and while there's a delay in usually getting them closed, you often have a little more time to work things, and typically they're not looking for a huge windfall in the end. They might start out that way. There might be a little infighting amongst the remaining people in the family who are taking control of the property. But in the end, the property's only worth what somebody will write a check for. And most people who've gotten estate property up listed for sale, they're not looking to utilize it, keep it, or develop it, or do much with it. So eventually they have to negotiate with some potential buyer and come up with a deal. On this property, maybe I'll be that potential buyer, but I have to go do my due diligence, and there's a lot to consider here. But even as I drive home from the property, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, and I haven't purchased materials in over a year because I've taken a year off from doing this just to give myself a break. I was doing them back to back a couple a year. In fact, I did my last year. I think I did 3 in that year. I have to go and look and see where the material costs have gone since, I guess we're talking post-COVID now, because certainly COVID years, and I did a couple of houses obviously in that time frame, that affected the prices in a negative way because they all went up. A lot of them have not come down. I've noticed that just in going to my local box stores for my own house and doing renovations and changes there over the last 2 years. But in the year that I've had off, I don't know where a kitchen sink has gone in terms of price. I don't know where the furnace will be in terms of price. And I expect the increases to be somewhat nominal, but the minimal amount or the large amount has to be taken into consideration with my numbers for this current property. So I got to sit down and do all that before I can go, hey, here's my offer. But just in discussing it with you, which I would do to myself on the way back from one of these anyway, is I think it's going to be a little bit steep in their asking, but it might be hard to get them to come down to what is realistic and what is that's a good deal, make the purchase, make your money up front, if you will, type of deal for me. So again, let me go back to the drawing board, and sometimes that's literally how I do it. Draft out in my not so artistic abilities, if you will, on paper what it is I want to do to the property, run the numbers, run the material costs, check with some of my contractors that I've used in the past to see where they're at on their costs, and see whether this property, being that it's an hour and a half away, is even feasible for me for where I have to do it, which is the north central portion of Connecticut. And this, of course, is in the eastern center part of Connecticut, down by the casinos. I literally passed Foxwood Casino on my way to this property. So having given you all that to think about, I'm going to pause to get home and sit down for a few minutes with my numbers and paper and thoughts, get something concrete down that I can discuss later, and then get back to you for what may or may not be the offering phase of this particular deal. Even if I don't go to purchase this property, every single one of these you walk through and every single one of these you do gives you that much more experience for the next one. The more of these you take on, the more confident you become, the better you become at it, and you become your own asset over time. But when you don't know, you ask somebody else, as I discussed in the beginning of one of my videos. The biggest mistake I made when I started out, and I started out in my early 20s, was I was afraid to walk up to somebody who would have had the answers on how to do this right and go, hey, how do I do this? So I hope this gives you some of that perspective. And I know it's just one person's opinion, but it's a person who's flipped a few houses over the years, and I've been doing well with it. So by all means, give me a little time, give me a little thoughts to myself time, if you will, and then I'll get something back on paper and get you some numbers, and we'll see where this goes. Tom for American Rehab once again. Ran the numbers on Ledyard yesterday. Not 100% comfortable where it puts me. I think even if I purchased that property right, did renovations at the minimalist level possible, I think given there were no surprises, which you know is a rare possibility when it comes to real estate, certainly older real estate that you're looking to renovate and make changes to, I think the resale value on the far end would not make this worth my time and money, and my family's time and investment in me doing that. So for those reasons and those reasons alone, I think we're going to pass on that property. I have another property that's been kind of eating at me for a while for a variety of reasons. I'm probably going to venture out to that property later today. I will provide you with the details in that next upcoming video. And I think you're going to find it to be an interesting one, even if I don't end up purchasing that one either. But we're going to go there with an open mind, and we're going to go there with the hopes that we're going to latch on to something that we think we're going to like, and maybe make it something special in the end. Stay tuned. I think you're going to enjoy the next one. And we'll put this one here on Ledyard on the back burner, and who knows, maybe we'll be swinging a hammer there in the future.